Okay, in this presentation we're going to look at one of the key and most fundamental techniques that you will be using in this class known as sighting. And what sighting is designed to do is to sort of correct and make sure our proportions are right in the drawing. So to do this, I'm going to take you through using your diagnostic drawing. So I asked you to draw a picture of a woman lying down in a very unusual position. Here is an example by a student from another semester, but it's fairly typical of the kind of work most of you did. So for a student who's taken an intro to drawing class who's never done drawing before, this is a fairly typical example. So yours might differ, but what I want to do is use this as an example, but I want you to be referring to your own drawing. So get your own drawing out of the figure, because we're going to do things to it. All right, so you're going to need a pencil, you're going to need a ruler. So take your drawing out. And then the first thing I want you to do is I want you to draw a line horizontally across the picture touching the chin. So you don't have to go all the way to the edge of the picture. Just make a mark that touches the chin that's horizontal. You can do it with pencil, you can do it with pen, it doesn't matter what you do. So that's going to be the first thing you do. And if I go too fast, just pause the presentation until you can catch up. And then put another line at the bottom of the head. Now I know her hair kind of flays out at the end. You don't have to go to the bottom of the last strand of hair. Just try and get the general bulk of her hair and put another line. All right, so now we have two lines that are marking a distance that we're going to call one head. All right, so this distance we're now going to compare to the rest of the body. So you can take a ruler, you can take your pencil, measure this distance, measure it with a piece of paper, whatever you want to measure it with, and then slide it up one more head and make another line. Okay, so what you see here now is two heads. All right, so one head and then two heads. So whatever you use to create this distance is double it and put it in. And then you're going to keep going, whoops, sorry, backwards. You're going to keep going until you get to the end of the figure. So if we look at this drawing right here, we can see that the figure is almost four heads, 3 3/4, whatever we want to call it. So almost four heads, which is fairly typical. So most of you probably got somewhere around the 4. Some might have got 5, some got 3. So let's go to the original. What does the original look like? So we take this photograph, and we put a line on the chin, and we put another line on the head, and you can see what I mean. The hair comes down here, so just have it with the bulk of the head. We have a measurement, what we can call a measurement of one head in the image. And so what you can do is you can, by looking at the picture, now it's different than yours because yours is on a piece of paper, but here's a picture on a screen. You can hold your pencil at arm's length. So this is the actual technique of sighting, and I'll come back to explaining it in a little bit more detail in a second. But hold your pencil at arm's length and close one eye and line the tip of the pencil up with her chin and your thumb with the bottom of her hair. And that'll give you a measurement of one head. And then take your thumb and slide it up to where the pencil tip was, which was basically her chin. So you take that unit and you slide it up and you make another mark and then another mark, and look what we have. So in this figure, we can see that it is not even 3, and in fact the legs are at exactly the 2.5 mark. All right, so what happened here? So we compare these two. The figure on the left isn't even 3, this is 4, some people got 5. So what this illustrates is a difference between what's actually hitting our eyes, what we see, and what we think we see. So this figure is in an unusual position. It's known as foreshortening. Her head is closer to us and the feet are further away. What that does is it makes what's in the foreground bigger and what's further away gets much smaller. So if you flip this picture over, she's tiny. These legs are really, this is half a head representing most of her legs. But our brain kicks in and our brain says, legs are longer than heads. Torsos are longer than heads. And so what we tend to do is we exaggerate the length of the torso and we exaggerate the length of the legs. Even though this is what our eye sees, this is what our brain tells our hand we need to be drawing. Because our brain influences a lot about how we draw. And what we want to do is try and get the brain out of the way. So the brain has lots of ideas about size, length, proportion, color, shape, all of these things that are going to influence your drawing. So what we need to learn how to do is to get the brain out of the way. And one way to do that is through various techniques. And we've just seen the first of those techniques, sighting, again, which I'll come to in a minute. But if you got 4, or you got 5, or you got 6, or even 7, don't feel too bad. It's not an unusual mistake. Here's Andrea Mantegna. He's an Italian Renaissance painter, very, very famous Renaissance painter, and one of his most famous paintings. Famous not only for its detail, the detail of the folds and the detail of the shading, which makes it look three-dimensional, but also the details, you know, of the stigmata on Christ, where the nails went through the hands and the feet and the cross. He was also very innovative as a painter because most pictures of Christ, this is Christ after he's been taken off the cross, show him horizontally with the head at one end and the feet at the other. And what Mantegna has done is he's turned him around and brought the feet towards us. So this was very revolutionary at the time. It was the equivalent of, you know, 3D movies, 3D glasses, you know, the first 3D film, I don't know, Avatar or something like that, just blowing people's minds. So this kind of painting blew people's minds away. The problem with it is if he had done this in art school, he would have got an A for detail, A for shading, but an F for proportion, because it's totally out of whack. This is not how people look. So let's have a look at what he actually did. So we measure the height of 1 foot, okay? And we take that length and we duplicate it. Whoops, sorry, going backwards again. We can see that Mantegna's figure, the dead Christ, is 4 feet high. All right, so seems kind of reasonable. So what I did was, based on the perspective of the picture, I had my son lie down in the exact same position, and here's what he looks like. Now, if we measure this, we can see if we took 1 foot and kept going, we're not even at 2.5. We're exactly at 2.5. In other words, the feet are much, much bigger as they're closer to us. And the head is only half of, well, the head and most of the chest all fits into 1/2 foot. Now, our brain can't conceive of that. It makes no sense to our brain, which is why we would exaggerate things the other way and flip them around. So what we want to do is we're going to learn techniques to avoid this problem so that we can look at what we're drawing, make measurements, make comparisons, and come up with accurate images. So how do we do that? Okay, so it's an issue of proportion. So let's say you're having to draw this Greek vase. If you're a beginning student, chances are you're going to make one of these 2 mistakes. Okay, it's either going to be narrow and long, or it's going to be wide and short. All right, so if we look at this, just look at this picture, the white box that's around it, and then look at the white box here. This is a rectangle. This is a rectangle that's stretched, and this is much more square. So this is really where the key for proportion comes from. It's the relationship of the width to the height, or one side to another side. And that's something we need to figure out, because if we can figure out the proportion of the objects we're looking at, then when we come to draw, we know exactly what we need to do in terms of the proportion. So if we're looking at this rectangle, so we'll simplify things right now, no more vases. And we say, okay, how do we draw this completely in the correct proportion? Well, we would start by doing what I just introduced. It's called sighting. Again, you take your pencil, you line the tip up with one side and your thumb up with another. What that does is it gives you a unit of measurement. All right. This is an extremely important technique. It's one you want to practice. Here we see a couple of examples of it. You're going to have your arm completely extended. Do not bend it. Okay, he has a bit of a bend, but we don't want to bend it because the distance changes the size. So we want to have a consistent distance. And the best way to do that is be at arm's length. Your thumb is going to line up with the bottom or the side or the edge of one part of the object, and your eyes will line up with another. And here's an example of somebody measuring the height of this apple. Now, it doesn't matter what this distance is in terms of numbers, whether it's 3 3/4 inches or 4 57 1/1000. It doesn't matter. It's not the number that matters. It's the comparison of this length to other parts. So if we turn this around and measured the width of the apple, we probably would find it's fairly similar, which means the apple fits into a square. All right, so what we want to do is you want to hold your pencil out on the screen and practice this. Go from one side and line up your thumb, and you'll get a measurement. Okay, so once we have that measurement, you want to keep the same measurement, keep your hand extended, keep one eye closed, and then rotate your hand and go to the side. And line your thumb up with the bottom of the rectangle, and you'll see where the tip of the pencil touches, about here. Now what you're going to do is you're going to slide your pencil up, and your thumb is going to come up to this point where the tip is. So one way to do that is to just look at the object right here, and then slide your thumb up so it lines up right there. And what you get is this. Exactly 2 widths. So one way of talking about the relationship between the width of this rectangle and the height of the rectangle is that the height is 2 widths. Now this is very valuable information, because once we know that, we know how to draw a rectangle in the exact same proportion. And if that rectangle is surrounding an object, a bottle, a cylinder, a face, whatever, we know that we're going to get the height and the width of the face correct. So we're going to get the basic proportions correct. All right. So what we want to do is know the information. Now we know the information. So then you come to your piece of paper and you make an arbitrary length. What I mean by arbitrary is do not take your pencil and bring it to your paper and mark off the same distance. It's going to be too tiny. It's going to be really, really small. You can imagine if you measured somebody's head who's sitting 10 feet away from you, the head's only going to be ½ an inch wide. It's way too small to do a portrait drawing. So don't worry about the actual measurement. So just make a width. You know that if you make it really big, you're going to have a huge rectangle. If you make it really small, you're going to have a tiny one. So you just kind of guesstimate, you know, what's a good width. And then you're going to take that width, you're going to measure it. A little bit of a typo there, excuse me. And then you're going to rotate your hand again, and you're going to double it. So whether this is 3 inches, 30 inches, 1 inch, it doesn't matter. You measure it with your pencil, and then you double it. And this is the essence of the sighting technique. And then when you connect the corners like this, you've got your rectangle perfectly in proportion. So how would we use this in a real object, in a real painting? Okay, so here's a bottle. Now if you measure the width of the bottle using the sighting technique, you would get a unit of measurement. And if you then went from the bottom of the bottle up, 1, 2, 3, you would find that it's exactly 4 times the width, height. Again, it doesn't matter what the number is. Who cares what the number is? Whatever you do, the height of this has to be 4 of these. Now, this happens to be an unusual situation. Life doesn't often work this way, but in this example, it did. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's 3.5, 3 and a bit, 4 and a bit, whatever. So let's say you're drawing this bottle. This is an important piece of information. So you might start with an arbitrary width. You create a height, okay, and you might get something like a rectangle. But the bottle is more complicated than that. So like where, once we come up the side of the bottle, where does this curve begin to happen? And so you can do the exact same thing. You can keep sighting it. And you notice that the curve starts at about 1, 2 1/3. And then the curve stops at about 2 3/4. I don't know. Whatever you want to call that distance, whether you're good with fractions, whether you're good with, I don't know, 2.4, 2.5, or whether you just say 2 and a bit. Or 3 and a bit more, or less than 4 and a bit. Whatever language you use, it doesn't matter. Whatever makes sense to you. Another way of doing it is to just measure this and see how many of those go in. So there's lots of ways to do this, and you're going to get creative, and you're going to have your own sort of method to figure that out. But this sighting technique will not only give you the height to width, but it'll also tell you where key elements are on the actual picture. Okay, and so this is what I was talking about earlier. A lot of things might look like this. It doesn't fit perfectly into 4. So what do you do? Is it 4 1/4, 4 1/3? I don't know, or 4 and a bit, or 4 and a smidgen. Whatever language you want to use that makes sense to you, use it. Okay, so for our first proportion studies, we're going to be looking at 3 objects, and I want you to draw 3 objects. You're going to eventually put them on one piece of paper, so what I would recommend is that you practice them first. All right, so if you go to the next video, we're going to look at how you would draw some of these basic shapes like ellipses. All of these are based on ellipses, but essentially you're going to be looking at what is the width of the object compared to the height. And that's going to give you the proportion, so your bottle doesn't look too tall and skinny or too short and wide, and the same with your bowl. If you notice the bowl, it's wider than it is tall. Okay? So the next video we'll talk about these 3 objects in particular, but hopefully you've got a good sense of what sighting is by now.